dusty, whoa. That's my disembodied being. So this is an interesting language itself is quite graphic, but it describes a physical, psychological, emotional state when you're afflicted, and then when the afflictions stir up to that you become agitated, you get tired. So some people translate this term as stress. Modern translators in the tradition are using the word stress now to talk about the klesha associated with the suffering. So that it's a state of stress, and it's a stress that drains, that draws out. And ironically, we frantically try to reduce stress by more stress. In other words, I don't know how, this is a line from the Lotus Sutra. The Buddha said, living beings are very confused. They try to end suffering with suffering, and they try to end their stress with more stress. And so we increase the activity in our lives. We increase the searching, the seeking. We get agitated and excited, and we fill our lives more and more and more with things to reduce our stress. We sign up for yoga, we sign up for Pilates, we sign up for Tai Chi. We're stressed out because we can't get to all three, and we have to balance the schedule, and plus getting the kids here and soccer, and blah 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 blah. And I have to go get my stress reduction class. And so in a sense, the Buddha says you get into a spiral because you think you lack and you feel that you're hollow. That increases stress. That stress and worry increases more activity. That activity then increases more stress and worry, and it's a vicious cycle. And you need to stop. He says, just stop. Stop. And feel the fullness of your life and yourself. And that's the beginning of the return. So the actual stopping in the Buddhist sense is not renunciation. It's a stopping of the frantic energy, the frantic activity to listen to yourself, to feel yourself, so you can begin the return. So that self-listening is to hear that deep voice of fullness before the outflowing. And that's why the other term here is like raging streams. That's a really good one. And it's not just talking about the freeway, it's sort of talking about our lives as a raging stream. Fetters, of course, is the same as yokes. Arrows is a sense of being pierced, of being pummeled, being hit on all sides. I mean, it's the onslaught of arrows. Jungle is a good one. And then entanglement. These are all terms for it. But you can see this is very emotionally psychoactive language, describes states of agitation that would then obstruct one's natural awakening. So here he says these are one and the same. So this is the same as the awakened state, but not. He's basically saying these are just different manifestations of this same nature. Unawakened, confused, chasing after things, losing our fundamental ground of our being, leads to the klesha, leads to the afflictions. And what we've done is we've taken that inherent awakening and transmuted it now into this. And later in the text he says it's as you've taken water and turned it into ice. So it's the substance is water, but you've frozen it into the ice. It's hard, it's brittle, and so forth. If on the other hand, you return the light to illumine within, you stop the mad chasing, running around, you do not continually try to identify and meld yourself with sensory states of things that you think belong to me or mine or define me or give me identity and so forth. If you stop that process, the ice melts and returns back to the flowing water. And so that's why he's saying they're one and the same. Afflictions are just bodhi frozen, if you want to use it that way, and bodhi are the afflictions melted. So this is important because what it means is, in terms of spiritual practice, you do not need to frantically go outside and then search for awakening outside your own life, outside your own existential condition. It's right there where the ice is. And so it's like knowing that ice, knowing where, taking an inventory, so to speak, of your own psycho-emotional, intellectual realm and working on there is exactly the ground of awakening. That's your temple. That's the way place. There isn't any other. So he says, do not seek outside. He continually goes back to this. He said, because the solution is in the unpacking and the untangling of your own afflictions. And once they're entangled in that way, they naturally manifest as bodhi again. So it's a really you could say it's like a closed circuit in some ways. But again, he's very clear here that do not think that my life is a mess, the world's a place of defilement, the world is a place of hassle and hustle and blah, 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 and I'm going to leave the world and become awakened. And he's saying, no, you don't leave the world to become awakened. You leave the mind that has identified and clung to that world to be awakened. The world will be the world. It is always thus. Your relationship to it is the only thing that you can control or change. So that's why he says later in a verse, he said, if you look for this Bodhi outside your own mind and body, it's like looking for a rabbit with antlers. You'll never find it. That's a very graphic description. So here, he's basically doing the non-dual, that these are one and the same. If in the next thought you're awakened, in the next thought you're Buddha. So thought after thought awakened, thought after thought Buddha. One thought confused, ordinary, thought after thought confused, continuing. You see this is a dynamic process as well. It's not like, I'm stressing this again, it's not like an attainment, but rather a maintainment, a dynamic equilibrium that requires constant mindfulness. Now, of course, over time, it gets to be sort of second nature, as do bad habits. So this habitual attending to your mind and your nature, after a while, it just starts to self-reinforce. You don't have to even think about it because it's so self-rewarding. I'm using self here in a cautious way, okay? It's not self-inflating, it's self-rewarding. It reinforces itself. Cultivation is something, what he talks about it here, he's talking about a dynamic process of cultivating, okay? You're doing this all the time. You're cultivating, you're working on it. It's like a piece of art that you're constantly, you've ever seen Picasso's work. Picasso's always changing and working on his pictures. And it's sometimes really frustrating because you could see he's working on one, you go, oh, he's got it. And then he does something else, you go, oh no, he ruined it. And he does something else, and you go, I got it. Oh no, he ruined it. There's a wonderful video of Picasso. You don't see Picasso, you just see the screen he's painting on, he's behind. And so all you see is a screen, and the picture emerges, Picasso's behind. And he's doing something like that, and you're watching and going, really, wow, it's good. Oh, no. And sometimes he erases the whole thing with ink, and it starts all over again. So cultivation's a little bit like that. It's something you're doing rather than something that's done. And so this emphasis here, again, is on the dynamic aspect of it, that it's something that you're doing over and over. But over time, it becomes self-reinforcing. It starts to hold itself, not because, how should I say it? Because it's natural. I guess that's the way I want to say it. Because it's natural. It's obvious that this is good. It's obvious that it's wholesome. The Buddha stresses this again and again. You should know for yourself. This is something you can know for yourself. It's something that actually is very obvious to yourself. The problem is that we second guess it, cover it over. But it's very obvious. It's very natural to see this. And so, in a sense, what he's saying is, this is not something you do now and you suffer through. Holding the precepts, being a vegetarian, crossing your legs, going through the pain, and then when you die, you'll get a reward. He's not saying that. He's saying the reward is immediately within the doing of it. And the more you do of it, the more the lightness of being occurs, the more the clarity of your life occurs. It starts to mutually start to reinforce, and it becomes self-sustaining. Not with the idea of renunciating now because later I'll get some pie in the sky when I die, sort of thing. But rather it's immediately accessible. And that's also the non-duality. My teacher used to say, however much false you can put down, that's how much true you can pick up. If you don't want to put down any false, you won't pick up any true. It's a quid pro quo. It's just that, this, that, this. Very immediate. So then he says, good and wise friends, Mahaprajna Paramita, the subject of this chapter, the great perfection of wisdom, and he says is the most honored, the most supreme, the foremost. Now he's really praising this. But what is this that he's praising? Because, we would think of it as he's praising wisdom. And wisdom then is metaphysical out there. But he's not. He's saying wisdom is something you do. It's not something you believe in. It's not something even that you extol, but it's a natural function of your unattached, unbound, liberated nature. Wisdom naturally, it's the flowing of the water. So when he says it's really great, it's foremost, he's talking about its functioning, not as some abstract value you place on it. But it's wonderful. He's saying this is wonderful existence, the flow of this. He says it does not dwell, it does not come or go. All Buddhas of the past, present, and future emerge from this. Very important lines. So, first of all, you could say it does not dwell, meaning that it is fluid, it is flowing, it's responsive, it's not static or fixed. Also, does not dwell could mean the unattached. It means a lot of things. It's the same word that's also can be used for not clinging, not grasping, not dwelling. Does not come or go. What does that mean? Does not come or go. I mean, everything we know comes and goes, right? Everything we, in our observable realm, comes and goes. Youth comes and goes, families come and go, countries come and go, bills come and go.
Essential nature doesn't come and go.
There's something he's alluding to here that doesn't come or go, that isn't conditioned in that way. But it could also be a behavioral stance. You don't come or go. If you're in the state of dynamic equilibrium, then you're in a sameness, and yet a dynamic sameness, not a dull sameness, but a flexible. And so coming and going only happens when you're setting up. If you don't set up anywhere, and you're constantly open and responsive, then there is no coming or going. That's why in the Avatamsaka it says, going and returning with no border, movement and stillness one source. It's talking about this state of the unattached, liberated consciousness. Because it doesn't set up, because it doesn't dwell, say, this is me, this is mine, it is therefore flowing and fluid all the time. And because it's that way, it doesn't have coming or going. And later he gets into this and he says, we're getting into the psychological state of the enlightened being. You want to say, what is a Buddha experience? It's not coming or going and doesn't dwell. And yet it's not dead and extinct. What is that? That's what's being described here. One part of the Avatamsaka Sutra says, when somebody reaches this place, and he says it here, he says, to the awakened person, all places are the same. Now, the next line, he doesn't say what I would imply, and to the awakened person, all time is the same time. And this is from the Avatamsaka. It says, when you're brought to search like this, when your spiritual search comes to this point, he says, the text says, it's like looking through a keyhole and seeing boundless empty space. And all places are the same place, and all time is the same time to this mind, to that consciousness. And that's the result of not dwelling, not attaching, not clinging. So it's a wonderful, free-flowing, I don't know what you want to call it, state of being. But this goes back to our discussion last week about the Chinese expression, the Ao Sheng Toso, to end birth and death, which sounds rather final. And that's not what's being talked about here, is not an ending of birth and death, but it's an ending of a conditioned cycle of something. So existence isn't ended, it's just liberated. So anyhow. Just a little bit about this, because I told you when I read, the first time I read the Vajra Sutra, some years ago. You know the Vajra Sutra? It's also called the Diamond Sutra. It's one of the early Prajnaparamita teachings. And the whole text revolves around one of the disciples called Subhuti. That's a nice name, Subhuti. I like that. Subhuti, not like Leroy. Subhuti, it's kind of nice. And Subhuti, Subhuti's at a state where he's realized that to be the arhat isn't the ultimate anymore. He realizes there's something beyond the arhat stage, and so he's left behind arhatship. But he hasn't gotten to the next stage, which is the bodhisattva. So he's sort of in between. And being in between sometimes is a little anxiety producing. And the Buddha said that's why we're all anxious, because we are all of us in between. We want to dwell, but we can't. So there's an anxiety associated with that. Duh. And so he's in between, and he asked the Buddha this question, well, where can I dwell? I would really like to know, because I'd like to dwell, you know. I mean, I'm in between. I sort of left LA, but I haven't gotten to San Francisco. I'm in between, and where do I dwell? And are you going to tell me when I get to San Francisco that San Francisco is not the ultimate goal, like you did the last time? See, so he's a little nervous. And so the whole thing begins, it's a series of questions between Subhuti. When I read it, it has two famous lines in it. One famous line is the line that Hui Neng hears when he's outside one of the stores that somebody's reciting, and he has an awakening on hearing one line from the Vajra Sutra. It's Ying Wu So Ju Sheng Er Ji Xin. Yeah, let your mind be unattached, clinging to nothing. He has an awakening experience, drops everything, takes care of his arrangements for his mother, and goes off to find this monastery where this monk is lecturing the sutra, and the rest is. We get this from there. Now, I didn't have that experience when I read the Vajra Sutra. That one is like, wait a minute, being attached, clinging to nothing, that sounds like really pleasant. I really do want to cling to something. And then another line in that text says, oh, by the way, there's no self and nothing that belongs to a self. So, whoa. And then it said, don't dwell anywhere. So, boom, I shut that text. I didn't. That was my response, and it took me years before I opened it again. So as I was thinking of this, when we hear this, the not dwelling, there's an impulse or a reaction to it that we do want to dwell. We want to abide. We want to have some sense of solidity, permanence, whatever. And so there's a tension here because the text is saying, don't do that. Don't follow that instinct. Don't follow that impulse because it will lead to suffering. And it's not, we have to be careful here because the Buddha is not making something up and saying you will be punished by some god or deva if you seek. But he's saying, no, in the nature of things, the punishment is built in because there is no place that you can dwell. There is no place you can set up. There's no place that you can attach. And your wanting to do that is actually a huge struggle against reality of things as they really are. And that struggle in the end, you will not win. Reality will take that over. So whatever you grab, whatever you hold on to, either psychologically, emotionally, or physically, and you dwell in the sense that this is me, and this is mine, or I am these things, or they belong to me, and they define me, all of this, the Buddha said, is a huge illusion that's bound to be popped eventually because nothing can do that. And so it's like we want to dwell, and at the other hand, we can't. And so this tension, the Buddha said, is at the source of the unawakened life. It's at the source of the dissatisfied life or the unexamined life. And we go on day after day after day in this struggle, trying to push back against the impermanence, try to set up a dwelling. And we say, well, it's not my physical surrounding, it's my body. And yet, you try to set up the body as a permanent dwelling spot, and you all are realizing, you don't have to realize, you just look at me and realize I didn't always look like this. I could show you I was once that big and, really robust and a lot of hair and freckles and whatnot. And now my teeth are falling out, I got 2 artificial hips, and, I'm just held together by super glue and a few things. This happens to all of us, and even though you invest in the body, you want to do a lot for it, it doesn't hold up. It cannot hold up. And then we say, well, then I'm my mind, I'm my intellect, I'm my degrees and my study. And you see that sort of thing also unravel as senility and dementia set in. You knock your head the wrong way and you can't remember all the books you read or all the, the equations and theorems that you had. It's just sort of like a program on a computer that's starting to, what do they call that when you do memory loss? What is that? It just sort of glitches out. pixelation on movies is the same, as a movie pixelates. That's what happens to what he calls here the five skandhas, the mind-body continuum. So I think about this because all that Hui Neng is doing here and all the Buddha appears to be doing is simply saying you need to start the profound spiritual life by looking profoundly at the material life, looking at profoundly what's right under your feet. Not to just jump and hope for awakened states or some heaven, but really examine clearly the ground right under your feet so you know it very well and know what it is and what it is not. So that sense of reality undergirds all of these teachings. I was thinking about this today because there was a lovely old woman that lived next door to me, and our houses are close enough so we could actually talk to each other through the window and see how each other was doing. And she was quite an interesting woman from the deep south, a southern belle, so to speak, at one point. But she was tired of being a southern belle, and she came to Berkeley to get liberated, right after World War II, and bought her house. And then she said, once she says, Martin, I know you're interested in Buddhism, and I think there's meditation states, aren't there? I said, yes, there are. She said, well, I've had one. And she said, where? At my dentist. I insist that he give me nitrous oxide, that laughing gas. I'm transported to other realms. So, in a sense, that liberation of her mind, she came in. Anyhow, over the years, though, in her house, she's just accumulated all kinds of stuff. Knickknacks, photos, music collection, furniture, items of clothing, and so forth. And then about a month ago, just during her breakfast, she put her head down on the table and died. Massive stroke. And there it was. And one of the other neighbors, I wasn't there at the time, called. Her son came. And they took Martha out, and all Martha had when she left was her nightgown on. And by the time Martha was then cremated and her ashes gathered, there wasn't even that. So I'm going to this three-dimensional living presence, a full life, memories, dreams, collections and so forth, to Martha's no more. Yet all this stuff is still there. So I'm watching this process and I'm thinking, all that she thought was me or mine, all of that connective stuff, is suddenly, she can't, there's no fingers to put on it. There's no way, none of this she's going to take with her, obviously. So then the family comes in and they go, oh my God, we didn't realize attic, basement, everywhere, every cupboard is filled. So they have a garage sale which goes on for 3 weeks. Right, and I'm just sitting on my front porch drinking tea, and I'm watching these people frantically come up. You've ever been at garage sales, you got to be careful. I mean, really, you got to have gung fu not to get hurt, because people are really aggressive, and they'll grab and trample over you to get, a teacup or a doily. And so for 3 weekends in a row, the place was swarmed with these people and they were gathering up this stuff. Now it became theirs, their me and mine, that they were taking back to their house to put in. And I'm watching this thing unfold, and some of them are coming up with trailers and station wagons, and stuffing it in. And the sons are like, oh, more money, more money. We're getting all this money from selling mother's stuff. And pretty soon, the whole house is emptied out. Okay? Everybody's taking the stuff, and it's empty again. Form is emptiness, emptiness, form. And now come in the real estate people. And so they change this house completely over, erase all marks of Martha, do the floors, do the paint, put in all these new gadgets from IKEA and everything, because this is called staging. Yeah. So you're familiar with this. So I'm watching this thing go on now. So Martha's going, the whole thing's gone, and now this whole thing's going, and you could hear the dollar signs going off in their head. They're staging. They even got a little table outside with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. So you come in, you can imagine yourself dwelling here, right? And so I'm just thinking the next Martha and whatnot will come in, set up, dwell, fill this house again, and then it goes. And that's samsara. I just started seeing, this whole cycle just go on and on and on. And I thought, wow, what's that all about? Because as much as she wanted to dwell, she couldn't. And as much as the people that are going to get the house want to dwell, they can't. The house will dwell. I mean, relatively speaking, unless an earthquake or something. And the house will dwell and dwell and dwell, and people will come and go, people will come and go, people will come and go, thinking they're dwelling. It's only the house that dwells. And some of the crap she had there will outlast all the people that got it too. And it's really, you start to think like, it's somehow the Dharma's being spoken in that exchange that I'm watching. So then I started to think about it more, this idea of not dwelling. And it doesn't seem to me to mean that you don't have what you need. You do not take up what you need, but you don't take up more than you need or less. You find that middle way. And that most of what we have, or what most of she had, was way beyond need. It had to do with a sense of identity that was trying to be held together. And as she got older and the body got frail, more things started to come to sort of cement that. And I started to see this process by which we want to dwell and yet can't, but never really face the fundamental truth that the Buddha is hinting at here, that if you can get to the point of breaking through the dwelling fixation or the dwelling fear, you can actually be liberated. So this brought to mind a whole series of things, because I was thinking of Hong Shui and I, when we were doing a pilgrimage. Before we started the pilgrimage, we were thinking of taking all this stuff on the pilgrimage. And the teacher was saying, no, don't take a lot of stuff. Just take what you need day to day. And we're going, yeah. And so I still had a little money left over. I was just before I became a monk, so I went down to REI and just got all the best equipment, sleeping bags, camping gear, the whole thing. And we got it all stuffed into this station wagon, this old 56 Plymouth. And the master said, well, he said, non-dwelling is really important, but you can go ahead and dwell, set up. He said, but if you're going to, why don't you get things that nobody else wants? Huh? Instead of buying the primo top-of-the-line REI stuff. So within about 3 weeks of the pilgrimage, all that was gone, stolen. And he said, what did I say? If you take things that other people don't value, you'll never be bothered by thieves. If you hoard and possess things that people value, you'll invite thieves. I'm going, oh yeah, okay. And so we were down to things that nobody else wanted. And everything we had and needed for 2.5 years could be packed into that little wagon. It was amazing. And so we ended up feeling very light, very dispossessed in a good way and whatnot. And then after we finished, the master said, well, why don't you take this other station wagon, because that 56 Plymouth was pretty much dead, and go up to Vancouver and start a new temple up there. There's a place and whatnot. So we were still pretty Spartan at the time, so we just transferred the stuff from one station wagon to the other and headed up, up to Vancouver and got there. And then a year and a half, 2 years later, the master called and he says, well, it's time for you to come back now and do something else, so pack up and go. We couldn't. It's like we could not fit all the stuff we had acquired into this station wagon. And we really tried. Really tried to stuff it all in so there was no visibility whatsoever, and still there was twice as much outside than was in. And we were just sitting there, what happened? Who did this to us? In 2 years, they've just plied us with all these goods, and we started to realize, oh my gosh, we have that mind unchecked, unexamined, has gone on and acquired. 10 more pieces of clothes than we needed. A couple extra sandals. 6 layers, 6 types of beads rather than one recitation, right? Calligraphy equipment, a favorite chair, blankets, sleeping bags. Can't leave that cooking kettle behind, really attached, and so on and so forth. And books. Oh my gosh, books. And so we were forced to jettison it, and that was suffering. What are we going to leave behind? And the master's just looking at us like, you guys are pathetic. But it was a lesson coming home that even though we had cultivated this, and even though we had read these texts, and even though we understood it, the habitual energy to do this is so strong that we actually, as it says here, entangle ourselves with these things, thinking falsely that it's going to give some sense of identity and permanence, when in fact it's just the opposite. So I illustrate this to say, when you hear the non-dwelling, it may sound nice and ideal, or it may sound frightening, but you have to put it back into the context of that we cannot dwell as much as we want. That basic fact of existence is where Buddhism begins. It's not the ending point, but it's the beginning point, and you don't have to be a Buddhist to realize it. I was also thinking of how this was illustrated by another person. I'm dropping out the text to tell you stories now, but there's the dwelling thing. When we were monks for a while, there was a very famous monk that my teacher invited over from China. His name was Hai Deng. Vajra means ocean lamp. And he was foremost in lecturing on the Vajra Sutra, which was really interesting to hear his lectures, but he was also a superb martial artist. In fact, he had been number 1 or 2 in China for 30 years as a martial artist. But he was just a little guy. I mean, he was really, I would say, 5 foot, 5'1", sinewy and thin. I mean, you just look at him and kind of say, what? But I tell you, he was, he was the real thing. And the story of his life is really interesting because it does have to do with this thing of non-dwelling. When he was a child, he actually witnessed his parents being killed by bandits. He was under the bed hiding at this time when they came, and it seared his consciousness and also his sense of revenge. But being such a little guy, there was nothing he could do. He knew who they were, but there was nothing he could do. He was only 9 or 10 at the time. But he vowed revenge at that moment and then went out to train himself with some of the best martial arts teachers available throughout China at that time, one to the other, learning weapons, learning the skills and so forth. And this is actually a true story. He related this to us. And when he got to the last teacher that he wanted to study with, who had this very deep internal Neigong skill. Neigong means internal energy. So some of you familiar with the martial arts, Neigong, Weigong, this kind of stuff? Neigong, someone who has Neigong appears to be really soft and nothing there, but they really have a deep reservoir of chi they can use. For example, his Neigong skill, and I saw this, it was hard to believe, he could put one finger down on the ground like this and then go lean up against a wall with his feet and hold himself up like that. So it was called the one finger stand. You try it, go on. Before, when we went to meet him the first time, he said, "Oh, you guys, college kids. Okay, but your teacher said I should teach you something." So he gave us one exercise to do, and all we had to do was put our fist down. And I couldn't do it for, he said 5 minutes minimum. By 3, I was just shaking and sweating. And then he did the one finger stand. He said, "So, bit to go here." He was amazing this way. Also, he could take blows to his body and not be hurt, except for the head. You wouldn't hit him in the head. And we went back to him in Hong Kong. We traveled, Master, 3 of us traveled back with him to study some more. And it was in Hong Kong, and people said he had the skills, so the television station wanted to see if he really had it, that he could take blows. So I said, "Yes, I'll come in and I'll take my monk's robe off just down to my t-shirt, and you can hit me with these 2x4 kind of bats on my body. I'll just put my hands up like this, and you can have whoever hit me. Just don't hit the head." And sure enough, he just whack, whack, bang, bang, nothing. So he had that skill. And anyway, his last teacher, where he learned this skill, was also a Buddhist monk, and the teacher said, "I'll teach you the skill, but you'll have to study the text as well." And he didn't really want to, but he did. As he started to read the text, he started to realize that this revenge was an affliction, was a major affliction that was tying him up. And then even if he got it, it wouldn't have liberated him because it would have kept the cycle going, because now he was understanding karma. And that, you can't dwell, but your mind dwelling creates karma that then continues to follow you. It's your baggage that you carry from life to life. And you realize that by fulfilling this revenge thing, even though he was capable of doing it now, to do it would only further entangle and inhibit him in this cycle. And so at that point, he let go of that. In a sense, he did not dwell anymore. So dwelling isn't just talking about a physical thing, it's talking about the psychological, emotional, hanging on, clinging, whatnot, to any state. And so in letting go of that, he said, then, for the first time in my life, I felt free and I felt liberated. And it was a really amazing story. So I said, well, then why are we studying with you to learn the martial arts? And he said, I'm not teaching you how to fight it, I'm teaching you how to not fight. And I went, what? And he said, if you have any gung fu and you become teachers, then you'll be able to take students who can beat you up. But to close the point, very interesting man, when we met him in New York, he got off the plane, he had his robe, a little attaché, a little briefcase, not a briefcase, a little bag that had his bowl, a change of clothes, his beads, and that was it. And from New York, all throughout the United States, all these different places to give lectures, people offered him robes, they offered him blankets, they offered him lots of money, offered all kinds of fancy beads, lapis lazuli, amber beads, all this very nice walking staff with the rings and so on and so forth. And I just watched this stuff, da-da-da-da-da. And when we saw him off in San Francisco, he had the same thing that he arrived in with New York. The one bag, the one bowl, and everything else. Everything that he had been given in between, he had dispossessed himself of by giving it to other people who wanted it. And so the last set of beads he gave me, he's like, oh, you like these? You can have these. So he gave me his last set of beads that someone had given him a set of amber beads. And I still have them. So anyhow, I'll stop there for tonight because we're out of time, but the next part of this is really an important chapter, and then next week we'll go over the afflictions more and unpack them. But I wanted to spend some time on this tonight so that you got the positive sense of this and also the more pragmatic sense of this, that the Buddha and Hui Neng are not talking about far out esoteric things. They're talking about the facts of life that are right before our face all the time if we'd only take them squarely. And dwelling, non-dwelling is one of them. So don't think, oh, non-dwelling is some elevated Buddhist thing. It's our condition. We are all of us non-dwellers, whether we acknowledge it or not. Probably lies the difference between suffering and not. So anyhow, stop there for tonight, and we'll continue next week. Any announcements?
Amitabha. Tomorrow and Sunday we have a Amitabha section, and if people want to a precept, please come to tomorrow 8 o'clock, before 8 o'clock. And that one, another one, if you want to pay way for your friend or yourself or your parents or you insane, you can do pay way, but need to do tonight. Write down the name, so we can. This is the last time to write in. We will put the pay way because tomorrow we'll start a section. So this is to announce that.
So who should they contact, you or tonight?
Tonight can. Better not me, mother or okay, the Jinchuan's mom there.
Okay.
Yeah, she can write in Chinese and English or some Vietnamese. I think we have a Vietnamese can help. Okay, this is tonight need to do for the pay way. Also, I think Mare have something need to help.
Yeah, we have request. We want
You
to.
got to speak up loudly. That microphone doesn't. It doesn't cover this room. It just covers everything outside this room.
We have request. We want to move the red chairs to dining hall. Actually, 34 chairs we needed moved there. And also tomorrow, after the transmission 8 precepts, 9 o'clock will be orientation or the class from the beginners. Dharma Master Jin Chuan Shi give instruction how to use the methods, recitation Buddha's name, what we can do from tomorrow and after tomorrow. And please welcome. Also, we We have the lunch for everyone. If someone wants to stay with us in the practice, please welcome.
So any questions about tomorrow they can ask you.
I only do calligraphy.
You only do calligraphy. Okay, so they can ask you. Right?
Yes.
Okay, so you'll stay around though afterwards. Okay, so we'll do the transference in English. Hey, every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see, how hands and hearts can find in giving unity. May their minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light break the darkness of their endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Ding Li San Bao.